Well, good morning, everybody. Before we begin this morning, can I just ask a question? Because whenever you're visiting a strange place, there's always something you don't understand, and I've discovered what I don't understand. What's this of age? What age is of age?
In what department? 21.
Is it 21?
For consuming alcohol is 21.
Really? You mean you can die for your country when you're 18, but you can't drink until you... Right. I don't know. What happens if you get married before you're 21?
Oh, you can do that.
I know, but I mean, how do you drown your sorrows? I mean, when the honeymoon's over, what happens then? It doesn't make sense, does it? Anyway. Right, yeah. Right. Oh, gosh. Okay. I won't ask the obvious question, like, who actually waits till they're 21, but I won't go into that. All right. We're carrying on then this morning with our series, We Believe in One Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. And yesterday I looked at the oneness of the church, the unity in the first session, which in a sense is one of the easier ones to deal with. It's one of the more obvious ones. And then yesterday afternoon we looked at the holiness of the church, what it means to be holy. And I pointed out that this is a subject which today people simply don't understand. What does it mean to be holy? How can I be holy in the modern world in a way that is relevant and meaningful and spiritually profitable and so on? And I pointed out some of the difficulties we face with that. And today we're looking at the Catholicity of the Church. And I think I have to say that for completely different reasons. The Catholicity of the Church is just as problematic for us today as the holiness of the church is. As I say, the causes of this are completely different, but the issues that we have to face in practical terms and in theological terms are just as deep and concerning. I want to read for you 1 Corinthians chapter 8 to set us thinking about this and expound this in a way that I hope will be meaningful to us all. The Apostle Paul, writing to the Corinthians, says, "Now as touching things offered unto idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. And if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing yet as he ought to know. But if any man love God, the same is known of him. As concerning, therefore, the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge, for some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience, being weak, is defiled. But meat commendeth us not to God, for neither if we eat are we the better, neither if we eat not are we the worse. But take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. For if any man see thee which hast knowledge sit at meat in the idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? And through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died. But when ye sin so against the brethren, and wound their weak conscience, ye sin against Christ. Wherefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. Let us bow our heads in prayer. Our Father, as we come into your presence this morning, I pray that you would help us to concentrate our minds on the things which you have set before us, that in all that we think, in all that we say, and in all that we do, we might truly honor, magnify, and glorify your holy and precious name. For Jesus Christ's sake we ask it. Amen. Now you may think that's a rather strange chapter from the Bible to read when we're talking about the Catholicity of the Church. But I chose it deliberately because I think it brings out, when we start to look at it, some of the issues that we face when we come to look at this particular question. And one of the reasons I chose this because the underlying problem that was going on in the church at Corinth had a great deal to do with personal feelings and preferences. Now I know, of course, that all of you are way above that sort of thing. I mean, you'd never let your own personal feelings or prejudices or preferences get in the way of anything, would you? But never mind. You see, it's easier sometimes to consider these things by looking at a situation in which none of us is likely to find themselves, and this is one of them. There's some very strange things that get eaten around here, but I don't think any of them have been sacrificed to idols first. I think that's a fair assessment. You see, that whatever you have for dinner, I mean, there's no telling where it's been or who's cooked it or what's come from and so on. But sacrifice to idols, probably not. And so I think we can stand back from this and say this is not our issue. And that's why I want to talk about it. Because we can examine it more objectively. We don't take sides one way or the other. We don't feel this particular thing personally. And so if we can stand back and look at the principles involved, then we can take things that we do feel personally and connect them. You see, once we've got the principles established, then we can make these connections and perhaps think again about the things that matter to us. You see, having seen how other things got in the way of the Corinthian church. Well, what was going on in Corinth? Why was this a problem? It was a problem because there was a cultural clash in the church. It was a cultural clash which in a sense was a product of growth. Now growth usually is a good thing. We like people to come into the church. We like to think that we're gaining new members. But of course, one of the problems with new members is that they don't know anything. You know, they sit in your seat. I mean, you've been there for 40 years, and they just walk in and sit in your seat. They don't know the hymns. You know, they don't know what's going to happen next. They just don't know anything. And nice as it is to have them, you know, because it bumps up the statistics, they really are not our kind of people. You know, and you can be made to feel very unwelcome in a church that if you go in for the first time, if it's not your home environment, you see. And we, of course, who are Anglicans, like to boast that we have a book of common prayer, so you can go anywhere in the Anglican world and have the same liturgy, the same pattern of worship. Oh yeah? You know? In theory, we have a book of common prayer, and it's sort of vaguely similar. But you know, if the Anglican world has managed to prove anything, it's that you can do the same thing in so many different ways that you really haven't a clue what's going on. Now, I know this because I don't have a church of my own. You see, I'm an ordained priest and so on, but I don't actually have a parish of my own. Never really have had because I've been in academic life. But I get invited to a lot of different places and I go to different churches, and this is the most frightening experience of my life. You know, the one thing I was really scared of coming to this conference is that somebody would ask me to take part in worship. And this isn't because I don't like to worship or I don't like to take part in worship, but because immediately goes through my mind, but how do they do it? You know, I have to go back to seminary and relearn everything because they'll do it in a different way. And there may be a whole lot of little things that are different, but they're different. And if you're going and you're supposed to know because you've been trained and you've been ordained and so on, and you know you're supposed to know what's happening and when you bow and when you scrape and when you do this and when you do that, and you really haven't got any idea because in your church you do it differently from where they do it here, you can be made to feel very awkward, you know, without anyone actually saying anything. And I'm one of that. I like to do it right. You see, I like to get things right and have it all sort of so and so on. So I'm scared to death when I walk into a strange church because I'm always afraid I'm going to put my foot in it, you know, one way or another. I mean, I'm one of these people. I only ever open my mouth to change feet, and well, it's true. And you know, it's. So I have very sensitive on this particular point. But it's a reminder of some of the things that can be very important to people, you see, according to what they're used to. Because if you don't move around, if you just stay in your own parish, in your own church and so on, and you're trained there and you grow up there and this is what you're used to, of course you imagine that that's what everybody does. And it's the same everywhere. And you don't have the experience of going around and seeing other things. So, you know, it's not part of your reality. And if you do happen to go somewhere else and find that something is done in a different way, this can be very disconcerting, you see, because it's not your way. And it's amazing how little things take on much greater importance, you see, or you notice them. I mean, they may not be very important. I feel I've got to the point where I now notice everything, but, you know, I don't let it bother me so much, I think. But you see, just little things, like you come to communion, for instance, and in my home church, when you go to the rail for communion, we give the cup to the communicant. You see, you take the cup from the person administering it, and so on, and drink yourself. In this country, whoever is administering hangs on to the cup. So whenever I go to the communion, there's a tug of war. You know, I'm pulling the cup away, and he's going, no, you can't have it. And so on like this, you see, and I think, oh my goodness, you know, do we have to go through this every time? And of course, needless to say, I'm right and they're wrong. Naturally, I mean, that's the common rule, isn't it, of all things? And I noticed this. Now, I mean, it's a trivial thing. It makes no difference one way or the other. But I mention this because this is the sort of thing that people notice. I mean, you know as well as I do, and certainly if you're ordained, you know this, you can stand up in the pulpit and preach Buddhism, and only 2 or 3 people will notice. You know, it just goes over their head. They're not listening anyway. Half of them are asleep. And unless you actually say at the beginning, I'm going to preach Buddhism, you know, in words of one syllable, and preferably in a loud voice, people won't really know. And they certainly won't care. But change the hymnal, turn the seats around, and my goodness, you've split your church. You see what I mean? Because people know about that, and they care about that. I mean, one church I go to when I'm in Australia, you have to see this to believe it. They have a congregation of about 50. But they're 50 really particular people. And so when you go for communion, you know, you think you have problems here. I think you have problems here. No way. They have different lines, 4 different lines. And one of them is for people who want non-alcoholic wine, one of the and normal bread. One of them is for alcoholic wine and normal bread. One of them is for non-alcoholic wine and gluten-free bread, and the other one is for alcoholic wine and gluten-free bread. Anyway, you have to choose which line you're going to go up in. And of course, if you don't know, if you're a stranger in the church, I mean, it's not as if they've got a sign up saying it's the in crowd knows where they're going. And of course, stupid little me, the first time I went and I was told this at the end, I said, I didn't even know there was such a thing as gluten-free bread. I mean, here I am, that's what's wrong with me. I've been eating this stuff all my life. I didn't know. But anyway, you see, it goes to this level, and they said, well, we like to sort of cater to everybody. You see? So they go to this point where creating a situation which is really chaotic in the church, but it's designed so that everybody in the church gets what they want in their particular way. Now, I'm not trying to be critical of this. You see, don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to be critical, but I'm showing example here because this is the kind of thing that does more to divide churches than anything else. You have more trouble over your music, over your style of worship. Are you going to have traditional? Are you going to have modern? What's going to happen if you stand up and say, the Lord be with you? Is somebody going to say, and with thy spirit? That's the traditionalists. Is somebody going to say, and also with you? That's the modernists, And then, of course, when I went to Alabama, I got Roll Tide, And so I said, all right, well, yeah, that's your religion. What's going to come back? You don't always know. But this is the sort of thing, as I say, that we have to deal with. And because of this, it's extremely important that we understand very clearly what matters and what doesn't. Because this is what Catholicity is essentially all about. You see? And it's very important that we get this right so that we know how to deal pastorally with the different situations that we come across, and we know ourselves how to relate to people who are different from us. Because it's a sad fact that there are 7 billion people in the world, and every single one of them is different from you, in some way or other. And so learning this is actually quite useful unless you plan to live in a hermitage for the rest of your life. And even that's not easy to do. All right? So we need to try to get this worked out in our minds. Now, in the Corinthian church, what you had were people who had been pagans. They had worshipped idols. I don't think this is a conflict between Jewish believers and non-Jew and Gentile believers. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's two groups of Gentiles who've come into the church, not Jewish believers. But one group says, well, I can eat what I like. They don't have a problem with this. The other group, they've been rescued from paganism. And they know, they're sensitive about idols and idolatry because they were caught up in it at one time. And now they've been delivered from that, and they don't want to be reminded of it. Because it was common in the ancient world for meat that was sold in the market to have been sacrificed or offered in sacrifice in a pagan temple beforehand. Actually, this was also common in Israel in the temple, because the temple sacrifices, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, were then sold off later and, as meat, because you weren't just going to throw it out and so on. So they distributed to the priests, and then what was left over would be sold off. And even today, in the Islamic world, this still happens. because they have sacrifices, and you can buy meat which has been sacrificed in an Islamic ceremony, and so on, and eat it like that. So was not an uncommon or unexpected thing. But the question was, well, if I do this, you see, if I go and eat this kind of meat, am I giving credibility to this kind of idol worship? You see, am I sort of getting caught up in this thing again that I have been set free from? And some people, of course, feel very sensitive about this. You see, it bothers them because they know, the power that this kind of false doctrine, this kind of false religion can have over people. Now today, as I say, this particular issue is unlikely to bother very many people because this is not a common thing that we meet. But there are other things which may touch people very closely. I mean, somebody who's been involved in illegal activity of one kind or another, and then they come out of that and they're delivered from it. They want to stay as far away from anything like that as they possibly can. Someone who has a drinking problem stops this, gets out of it, doesn't want to go near, doesn't want to be tempted, and you mustn't do this. They stay away. Now, you might look at this person and say, well, why are you bothered by this? It's not you shouldn't, let this get you down and all the rest of it. But in their minds, you see, they have been set free from an addiction or some kind of problem that they've had with this in the past. And so for them, they have a conscience about this. They've got to stay as far away from it as possible. And for you and me who don't have this addiction and don't have this kind of background and don't really understand personally why they feel like this, to sort of throw it in their face and say, that's absolutely silly, you should just forget that, and you shouldn't think this way, is not only insensitive, it's also wrong. Because just as you might be accusing them of putting something unimportant in the central position, so are you by attacking them on this. You see, by saying this doesn't matter and riding roughshod over their particular hang-ups and feelings, you're actually doing the same thing as they're doing, but in response and from an attitude of superiority. You see, thinking, well, I know better than you do, which in one sense might be true, but it's not true in a very helpful way. And I say this because this is the kind of thing which can do more to divide people and to destroy what we call the Catholicity of the Church, the universality, the ability of the Church to embrace all shapes and sizes, all types of people together in one community, because we rub up against each other in the wrong way. And if we rub up against each other in the wrong way for reasons which we think are perfectly justified in our own minds, and therefore we're not going to be persuaded that we're doing anything wrong, this situation is made even worse. And this is what the Apostle Paul was having to deal with in the church at Corinth. All right, so what are the principles which he applies? How do we look at this? How should we look at this? First of all, we have to get to the truth. We have to base ourselves on the facts. I mean, what is the truth here? Well, the truth is there are no idols. If you sacrifice meat to an idol, you're not actually doing anything. I mean, there is no idol. You can go through the motions, you can that kind of thing, but there is no such thing as an idol. So really it is a complete waste of time. It is an illusion and a self-delusion, if you like, in that respect. And we need to know this because it's vitally important as Christian people that we do not accept the existence of idols and of other gods. There is only one God, and it's important that there should be only one God. Christianity is not one religious option among many, and you're free to choose whichever one suits you, and it's all equally valid. Christianity is the truth. It is the truth in a way that anything which disagrees with it, or which contradicts it, is false. And in our modern world, as I said, what I said the other day, where tolerance, you see, is the big thing, and accepting, the differences and all the rest of it, we have to say this. You see, we have to believe this. And we must not find ourselves in a position where we are giving undue recognition to something which we do not believe in. You see, which we believe is actually wrong. Now, this does not mean, of course, that you go out and cause offense to people deliberately. No, that's a different thing. But we have to be extremely careful in our own minds, in our own world and so on, to insist that there is only one God and only one truth, and that truth has been given to us in and through Jesus Christ, and that whatever contradicts that is not acceptable. Now, of course, in the New Testament, we see that this was the issue with Judaism, with Jews who became Christians. They had to recognize that the teaching of Jesus superseded the law of the Old Testament, including on this kind of issue. There wasn't a problem in Judaism about sacrificing meat to idols and so on. There were no idols in the Jewish world. But of course, there was kosher food. And for Jewish people who had been brought up, you eat this and you don't eat that, and so on, and you do it in a certain way. Eating was a very ritualized thing. Suddenly to say, well, you can do what you like, you can eat anything you want, this is very disconcerting. And if you have something put in front of you, food in front of you, that you're not used to eating, it can make you sick. Particularly if you think it's wrong to eat it. You see, it's psychological in the end. Now, you may think you're way above all this kind of thing, but I've seen it. You see, in situations that you might not imagine. When I was teaching in London back years ago, we used to have groups of American students come. They do their sort of semester abroad and so on, and we would host them. And it was always a very good learning experience for both sides. Because we discovered that these American people didn't eat our food. Well, some of it they did. But there were things that we would eat without thinking that they would turn up their noses at and not touch, like liver. We would eat liver. Liver's good for you. Lots of protein and so on. But anyone who's been in any restaurant in this country knows that eating what's good for you is not the American way, is it? I'm sorry, but it's true. And anyway, sort of liver and so on. Red cabbage. Rabbit. Rabbit's good. I bet you haven't eaten it. Lamb. You see, and you don't really get lamb in this country. I mean, when I was in Alabama sort of teaching, I would go home in the summer, and every time I went out to dinner, I'd always have lamb, and people say, why do you have lamb? I said, because I can't get it in the States. Or you can in fancy restaurants at huge prices, but like in an ordinary place, you don't find that. So I get it when I get home. And cheese. You see, in this country, the only cheese that exists is plastic. It's true, it's all plastic. And and they say, do you want Swiss or American or whatever? I think, what? Whereas we have real cheese. I mean, lots of different cheeses and so on. But if you're not used to that, people say, what's that? That's cheese. Oh, but it's alive. Yeah, it's meant to be, never mind, just eat it. And so on. So you see, even in this context, you see, where culturally you wouldn't expect this kind of problem, this kind of difference, it can be there, and it's something that people feel. You see, dare I say it, even at this august conference, I have heard people say at coffee time in the morning, it says on the program, coffee and donuts, and there are no donuts. Have you noticed that? Yeah, that's been a complaint I've heard. See, people notice these things. So it does touch people very closely, very much at the heart. And we need to understand this and realize this. You see, does it matter? Well, of course, in another way, no, it doesn't really. I mean, as long as you eat well and eat enough and you don't go hungry and you survive and you're healthy and so on, it really doesn't matter very much what it is that you eat or the order in which you eat it. But people don't think that way. People can be very particular about this kind of thing. And here we have to deal with this. You see, we have to understand this, because what is true of our eating habits is, of course, true of our worship habits. It's true of everything in our lives, you see. And so we need to start right at the beginning and say there are no idols. You see, that's the basic principle, that all this business that these people are getting caught up with, in theology, in theological terms, this is a non-issue. You should be able to eat and drink whatever you want. Everything that God has made is good. There's no such thing as something evil in the world. Evil is not a thing. Evil is not material or something like that. Evil is disobedience to God. Evil is personal. The devil is a person who rebelled against God. You and I are persons, people who have disobeyed God. That is what the evil is, a broken relationship with God. The evil is not in things, but people think it is, you see. They think you can stay away from that, don't touch this, don't go there, and so on, because it's bad for you. It may be bad for you for all sorts of reasons, but it's not evil, you see, in the sight of God. And you must not think this way, because everything that God has made is good in itself and has a purpose. Now, that purpose may not be for you to eat it. I'm not suggesting this. And you have to be in control of your diet and all that sort of thing, yes. But don't blame the thing. You go around, you see billboard signs saying things like, try this chocolate, it's sinful. You ever notice that? For some reason, chocolate is sinful. And I take this personally because I'm a chocoholic. And, I resent being told I'm being sinful every time I have a piece of chocolate. But anyhow, that's not where the sin is. You see, the sin is in me, not in the calories. I can't blame them. They're only doing their job. And if I overdo it, that's my fault. Don't blame the sweets that you're eating. Blame yourself for doing it. All right? So don't think of evil in this particular way. But we also have to remember that not everybody understands this. Not everybody has the same degree of knowledge. And we need to realize this, because part of the purpose of having the church is to teach people. You see, the Book of Common Prayer, I've talked about this, mentioned in passing. Let me just explain what the Book of Common Prayer is, because very few Anglicans know what it is. They've got one, but they don't know what for, really. The Book of Common Prayer is a book of teaching. It's meant to teach you how to pray. When the disciples went to Jesus, they said, "Lord, teach us how to pray." You have to learn how to pray. Now, in our modern world, of course, this is countercultural. Because in our modern world, we think all you have to do is close your eyes, open your mouth, say whatever comes out, and that's praying. You know, prayer is something that should be spontaneous. And what's worse, we think that if prayer isn't spontaneous, it's not genuine. And therefore, to use a liturgy is kind of the vain repetition. It's dead. You know, you can't sort of be put in this particular straitjacket, constrained in your spirituality and so on. This is the popular feeling today. And so, of course, people want to change the worship in the church to suit their personal expression, their feeling. You know, I don't feel like doing this today, let's do something else. You see, so we do the something else. Let it be spontaneous, come from you. What we don't understand, and this is a general cultural thing right across the board, is that real prayer, real spirituality, is like sports. See, I've been in Alabama a long time. I know the connection. But it's true. The Apostle Paul tells us this. We're like an athlete. You see, you're running the race. It's a spiritual thing. And you have to train for this. Now, if you look at some of the more elegant sports, forget football, that's not very elegant. But, you know, something like figure skating, this is my favorite one. You know, you see these people sort of skating across the rink and you think to yourself, oh, it's so light, it's so airy, and it just gives the impression anyone can do this. Well, try it sometime. You know, and I'll count how long it takes for you to fall flat on your face. And falling flat on your face on ice is a particularly interesting experience if you haven't done it before. This is tough. It's difficult. And to achieve that grace and that spontaneity and that freedom, you see, which these people have, it takes a lot of training. I once went to a piano competition. I wasn't playing, I hasten to add. That wouldn't have been a competition. But I went to listen, and it was interesting to hear the different people. They were all playing Tchaikovsky's first piano concerto. You know, that's the standard thing. And it came down in the end to two people, which one was going to win. And one of them was technically perfect. Every note, everything. But that was all. You know, it felt like a computer program or something, you know, playing. The other one was less technically perfect, but she had got into the spirit. You know, she knew Tchaikovsky. She was playing Tchaikovsky. The other one was playing the piano. And the judges mentioned this. They said at the end, and they gave it to the girl who was playing the Tchaikovsky, even though she wasn't absolutely technically perfect, because she had got into the spirit of it. And she'd only done this because, of course, she had trained and trained and trained and had, you know, got on the wavelength of the composer. She knew what was going on. This is what the prayer book is for. It's to teach us the way of God. It is to get us into the mind of the Lord, you see, so that we can think God's thoughts after him. And it's only when you've mastered this, when you've got this, that you don't need the book anymore. You know, people look at me, people are always shoving the book in my face when I'm in church. And I said, no, I know it already. You know, I don't want to tell them, I know it, you so-and-so. But, you know, because I'm kind and polite and all that. But, you know, you do get to know after a while, and that gives you a freedom that you don't have otherwise. You know, you don't have to be tied to the book necessarily, but you have absorbed it, and so you're in the spirit of the book. And this is what the prayer book is there to do. It is to teach you this. This is what the creeds are there for. They're there to teach you how to think, you see, so that when you come across something, when you come up against something, you absorb it. You're part of it. You sense you have what is right and wrong. It's part of you. And this is something that you can only learn by hard slog. You know, you want to be an Olympic athlete? Well, you better start training now. You know, or preferably several years ago. You know, in order to get where you want to be. This is not something you can just pick up and do spontaneously when you happen to feel like it. And if this is true in physical things, how much more is it going to be true in spiritual things? You see? So the essence of the Catholicity of our church, the essence of our word is to understand this, that we need to be taught what the principles are. And that we are given the tools so that we get not only the content that we should be learning, but also our priorities right. We learn what sort of things we should be doing. You see, what constitutes real worship? What constitutes real faith? What constitutes the teaching of the church? What is universal and what must be applied in every situation? And this is where Paul starts. You see, in dealing with this pastoral problem, go to the principles, go to the basic underlying beliefs, and say to yourself, well, where do we go from here? Then, of course, he said, you must do this, but you must apply your knowledge, you must do what you're doing, apply it in love. And I said yesterday, this is actually a very hard thing to do, particularly when you know that you're right. You know, how do you actually get it across to somebody else? How do you get them to see things the way you see them without offending them in the process, without alienating them, without making them feel inferior to you? It's a very hard thing to do. And yet this is what we are called to do, because there is a place in the church for everybody. You know, we don't have the sort of spiritual athletes at the top and then the peasants down below and so on. No, we're all in this together, and we all work together, and we help one another, and we learn from one another. I learn an enormous amount from other people. So I've been teaching for I don't know how long, now 30, 40 years nearly, and I learn more from my students than I ever teach them. They don't believe that, because they say to me, but I don't know anything. I said, no, and I said, that's what I learn. You know, and well, it's true, because then you have to learn how to communicate with them. You can always tell who has just come out of seminary when they stand up in the pulpit. Why? Because they preach their class notes. Have you ever noticed that? You know, somebody stands up and says, well, you know, because Karl Barth said. And of course, the people sitting in the congregation think, who? You know, oh, I think there was a man here once called Barth. Yeah, I remember him. You know, they haven't got a clue what you're saying. But of course, you're coming across very clever, you see. Or they quote Greek in sermons. Now, one of my basic beliefs is that there's a layer of hell reserved for preachers who quote Greek in sermons. Why? Why? Well, first of all, they usually do it wrong. I mean, very often wrong. But not only that, what are they communicating? You see, what they're communicating, the worst thing anyone can ever say to you or ever say about you when they go out is, oh, that man, he's so brilliant. I didn't understand a word he was saying. Right over my head, he's really bright, you know. You don't want people saying this. Do you know, there are people out there, their whole reputation is based on this. There are famous books. You see, I won't mention any names, but you get these theologians who write books. Nobody ever gets past page 3. because they can't understand it. But instead of saying this is junk, I can't understand it, they say, oh, this man's so high about, I mean, this is just the most fantastic thing. You know, I'm the stupid one. You know, I can't get into this. And I said, this is altogether wrong. I said, because the most brilliant book of the New Testament is John's Gospel. And what's John's Gospel? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You know, that's how it starts. Not at the commencement was the hermeneutic. You know? I mean, it's put in a way that ordinary people can understand, and yet you can never get to the bottom of that. A 3-year-old can memorize John's Gospel, but a 90-year-old can never really plumb the depths. That's true brilliance. You know, for goodness sake, communicate. If you're not communicating, you're not brilliant. You know, even if you know a whole lot of long words, you're not brilliant. Okay? So be careful about this. Communicate the message. Teach the message. This is very important. Make sure that people understand what you're saying, even whether they agree with you or not. Just get it across to them. Stick to the point. It's very easy to get lost on something you want to say. You know, you've got a bee in your bonnet. You want to get up there and you want to preach about this, that, or the other, really sort of ram home something. But the something that you want to ram home to whoever it is really not very central to anybody, not very important. It's really a prejudice that you have. And if you do this, you find generally that either people don't understand what you're saying, or they're not there. You're getting at somebody in the congregation. The person that you're getting at doesn't turn up, you know, the week that you're getting at them, and so on. It's just not worth the effort. You know, don't do that. Don't get lost. Preach to the subject. Stay on the point. Keep central things central in your own message and your own teaching, and in your own practice. And then you'll see that other people will gradually come round and see that what's important to you will be important to them. You see? The fact of the matter is, most people have to be weaned off silliness of one kind or another, you know, weaned off prejudices that they have for whatever reason, and made to see what the central points are. It doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come naturally to me. It doesn't come naturally to anybody, really. And we have to teach this. This is what our common worship, our common prayer is all about. You see, teaching what is central, concentrating on what is important, getting people to base their lives on this. And then, of course, weighing the consequences of our actions on other people. What if I make a big issue out of this thing, important as I think it is? What's the result going to be? You know, what kind of fallout is there going to be? Is it worth it, you see, to get all worked up about this or that? I mean, am I going to pay a heavy price for this in the end? Or is it better just to let a few things slide? And you have to, you know, in worship. There's always going to be something you don't like about something, about your church or about other people or something like this. Weigh up in your own mind, how important is it? You know, is it better just to leave it alone, let it sort itself out in good time? And that requires wisdom and discernment. But it's very important to preserve the unity, preserve the Catholicity of the Church. The Catholic principle is that everyone who is called by God in Christ has a place in the body. The eye cannot say to the ear, I have no need of you. You see, it's 1 Corinthians chapter 12. You can read it for yourself. I'm not saying that the eye should look at the ear and say, well, I'm fed up being an eye, maybe I can be an ear. No, you want to be who you are and what you are, because you have your contribution to make just as they have their contribution to make. We are not called to imitate each other. We are called to imitate Christ. You see, and find our place in the body in this way, but recognize that everybody belongs. This hit me a little while ago in my own church. You'll understand from what I've said that I'm not allowed to do things in my church very much because it's just too disastrous. But a few weeks ago, they were short on people sort of administering at communion, so I was asked to go and administer the cup at the last minute, and I did. And I was going along the row sort of administering the cup, and it suddenly struck me, what a weird bunch of people we have in our church. I mean, I know them all. No, I do. I know them all. And I know all their sort of foibles and so on. And yet I found myself as I was going along the row and sort of just giving, the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ, which was shed for thee, preserve thy body and soul unto everlasting life. And I was saying about this, and thinking to myself, what a gift you are to the people of God. Of course, I didn't say that to them. But I was thinking that. I said, what a blessing, that this particular idiot is in our church. And what a contribution, this kook over here makes to our common life. Now, there's no point pretending. You see, the Apostle Paul doesn't pretend. He said, look around. God has not chosen the many rich or wise or whatever. God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. I mean, we are all a bit strange, in our own way. But real love is to love that, you see, and to say to yourself, I actually benefit from that. I need that. In my church. And every once in a while I'm allowed to preach in our church. It doesn't happen very often, but I do get the opportunity now and again. And one time, and I just said, we were talking about the congregation, and it was a memorial service we were having. And I said, I've been a member of my church, my particular parish, for over 40 years. And I said, I don't want to offend anybody here. I said, but when I look around the room, I said, I see you, but I also see people who used to be members of the church, but who've gone on, who are in heaven now. I said, because my experience of this congregation is not just those who are sitting here right now, it's those whom I have known in the past who have been part of it. That's one of the beauties of being in a place for a long period of time. And I mentioned some names, and of course people came back. I said, remember so-and-so, and remember so-and-so, and remember so-and-so, how funny they were, and so on, and how much we all loved them, and all the rest of it. And before long, everybody was feeling, we're part of a bigger thing. And this is so important. This is the Catholicity of the church, not just in this life, not just the people we see around us, but the people who've gone before us, the saints in heaven. You see, we commemorate the saints for a reason. And I think it must have been All Saints' Day I was preaching, something like that. Anyway, just remembering this, and remembering these people as they were, warts and all. Not in some idealized way, but as they were, as sinners saved by grace, as people who belong to Christ, and therefore are gifts to us, you see, however awkward and difficult they may be. I often say to people, there are two forms of eternal life. You can believe in Jesus, die, and go to heaven. That's the officially approved form of eternal life. The other way is to get yourself elected onto a church committee and say no to everything. No, we can't do that. No, I don't agree with that. No. And these people, whom I call the abominable no men, they are eternal. You can poison their coffee. You can hold the meeting at a different time. You can suggest that now that they're 93, they might like to take a rest. No way. You know, they carry on. And yet they're part of the body. I know I've got to shut up. Case is standing there. I can see it all. This is what Catholicity is all about. You see, it's being a fellowship of God's people. It's dealing with people whose experience, whose vision, whose understanding, whose interests, whose spiritual outlook is different from ours. But we have to come to terms with it. We have to learn to love them, and if we love them, then we learn from them. And I hate to say this, and I'm going to stop because I know I'm getting into real trouble here. We might find that we're changed by them. Changed in ways that we would never have imagined possible, and changed for the better. And that's God's gift to us in his church. Right, questions? One of these days I'll learn to keep to the clock. Yeah.
So the minutia, has sort of hesitate to use that word.
Yeah.
The worship service.
Yeah.
Individual congregations.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's sort of double-edged sword. You can use it to define your identity as a congregation, or you can use it to fence yourself off from other congregations. And I'm wondering, should it be the goal to sort of strike a balance to resemble the rest of the body of Christ as well, or should we as a congregation be happy just to be the eye of the body of Christ and be different from other congregations?
Right, so what do we do about the minutiae? How do we come to some kind of arrangement and so on? Well, I think, you see, one of the beauties of having a liturgy the way we have is that there is an order, there is a baseline on which to work, all right? When it comes to the details, all you really can do is work it out, you know, and be aware that there are many dimensions to this. See, let me tell you a little story. When I was ordained, when I was priested, I had to take a communion service, you see, just to show that I could do it now that I was priested. And it was a big ceremony and so on. And I was served my title in an Anglo-Catholic parish. And of course, as you know, you can tell, I'm not Anglo-Catholic. So I didn't really know what to do and so on. And there were certain things I didn't want to do. And one of the things I wouldn't do was elevate the host. You see, because that's a no-no if you're an evangelical. So I didn't do that. And I thought no one would notice. Well, 3 little ladies came up after the service furious with me. And they were really upset. And I thought, oh no, what have I done? I wasn't trying to offend anybody. You know, I was just trying to sort of live out my own theological beliefs. All right, so they look at me and I said, I'm sorry, what did I do? And they said, not what you did, it's what you didn't do. You never done that. They didn't know what to call it. They just said, you've never done that. So I said, I'm sorry. I said, does it matter? I said, does it really bother you that much? I said, don't you know? And I said, well, no, what? And I said, well, it's when you do that, it said that we go out and switch the kettle on for tea, and now you're going to have to wait because the water hasn't boiled. Well, I went home and burned all my liturgy books, you know, forget that. You know, this is what it means to these people. Now, I'm not saying that this is good or right or anything else. I mean, please don't misunderstand me. But I think you've got to connect where the people are. You see what I mean? You've got to see, well, this is their understanding. Now, okay, you'd fail, you know, your first year in seminary if you thought like that. I know that. But these people aren't that, they're not in that place. They're somewhere else altogether. You know, and for them, the what you might think the minutiae, the bits and pieces and so on, it all had a particular meaning. And I had to learn what that was. Another time I was preaching a sermon and the church warden's husband came in, opened a stepladder, stood up, unscrewed a light bulb from the roof, changed the light, put the ladder down, walked out. This was during the sermon. And afterwards, of course, he came to coffee. I said, Alfred, what were you doing? And he said, the light bulb needed to be changed. And I said, well, yes, that's right. And he said, well, I waited till you got to a point in the service where you wasn't doing nothing. It was East London. You wasn't doing nothing. You were just standing up there talking. And I figured I could do it now, because nothing's happening. Yeah, well, there's no point saying, Alpha, you should have come in, sat down, and listened. That was the point, because he wasn't in that place. You see what I mean? Now, please don't misunderstand. I'm not justifying any of this. I'm just really saying you've got to find out where these people are coming from, where they're at, and work with that and try to bring them into an understanding. And telling them off and saying you must never do anything like that again, you awful person, is not the way to go about it. All right? Okay. Yeah.
Piggybacking on Andrew's question.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is rather a big question, but how
Mm-hmm.
can we navigate between the two extremes
Mm-hmm.
of being so accommodating
Mm-hmm.
that we become the people who have 12 different lines for communion?
Yeah.
And on the other hand, becoming so very, very particular
Mm-hmm.
that nobody is able to get into the church.
Yeah.
Is it safe to say that, as Andrew pointed out, not only are we a body in the particular local parish, but between parishes,
Mm-hmm.
and even between denominations,
Mm-hmm.
we have things that we can give to one another.
Right. So how do we get the balance between the extremes, is what you're saying? I mean, how do you know that before you sort of bend over backwards to keep everybody happy versus, you're so strict and particular that you lose your church? And where do you get the balance in the middle? This is, of course, there's no simple answer to this, but I would say my own sense is when a problem it comes up, you see, what I would do is simply say, look, there is a problem here. There is a disagreement. Let's face it, whatever is going on, whatever issue it is, this has happened, and this is the situation that we're in. Can we live with this situation? Is this right or wrong? What do we do? And as you, if you are the minister, whatever you are, a teacher, you have to say, well, what are the basic principles? We're here to worship God, not to satisfy ourselves. And we must put Him first, and that may mean, as it meant for Corinth, sacrificing your own preferences. You see, for the others, not to say that that you can never have your own ever. Because this applies to everybody. I mean, everyone has to be prepared to sacrifice. But get this message across first. You see, before you get into the details, get into the basic principle. How far are we prepared to go to accommodate one another, given that there are these differences? What's the best way to do this? How should we go about it? And get people making suggestions, get people saying, well, maybe this, that, the other. Most people tend to be accommodated as long as they feel they're being listened to, as long as they feel they matter, and that you're not secretly trying to get rid of them, particularly. That there's a place for them, and that their concerns and so on are being appreciated. And then you can begin to work from that and sort of say, well, yeah, you're making this point and you're making that point. How can we combine? And not let it become a free-for-all, because, of course, you just don't get anywhere then. But work through this one step at a time and say, well, I think we're going to do this. And one of the things I've done at different times is say, well, let's try this and see how it works. We're not going to do this forever and a day, but we'll try it for a month or so, see how it works, and then we'll have another meeting and assess it. And often that, sort of breaks some of the barriers down, and you can move, in a particular direction. But you have to be on top of the situation all the time, because every particular case is different. There are general principles, but there are, every congregation has its own issues. When it comes to other churches, other denominations, that's actually easier, because you don't have to deal with it on a daily basis in your own church. But I would certainly never allow, and I would never do this myself, and I would never allow anyone else to do it, I would come down heavily on it if somebody did, to start criticizing other churches. This is not what we're at. I think one of the problems with the Episcopal Church in this country is that it's become a coalition of the disgruntled. So it seems to me. You get Catholics who want to have sex, and you get Baptists who want to drink, and they come together and become Episcopalian. But they really don't. They know what they don't want, but they don't. You know what I mean? It's not a positive thing. And if this is what happens, it's all wrong. You mustn't be Episcopalian or Anglican just because you don't want to be something else. That's hopeless.
All right.
Okay.
Dr. Bray.
Right.